Okay, welcome everyone to this week's Thursday Thoughts. I'm delighted that we've got so many people with us today, and thank you for taking time out of your day during these really unique times to connect with us. My name is Amy Scott. I'm the Head of People Development at Irwin Mitchell, and I just want to share a brief word or two about these sessions. So we created them with the primary focus of sharing and bringing our clients, colleagues and communities together. So we host them on a weekly basis on a range of topics, and we're joined by experts in their field. I know that in advance of today's session, we've had a number of questions about the job retention scheme, so thank you for those. I'm really pleased to say that we've hosted a number of sessions about that very topic. So what we're going to do after this session is share the link to those sessions for those of you that ask questions on that. Please do ask questions during this session using the Q&A panel at the side of the screen. The session will be recorded and we'll share the link after the discussion today. So let's get started, shall we? So joining us today is Jess Heagren. Jess has joined us from That Works For Me, and a little bit about Jess. She was previously the Director of Strategy and Distribution for one of the UK's biggest insurers and managed approximately 600 people across the UK. In 2012, she launched the Direct Line Group Diversity Network Alliance, a cross-group initiative to increase diversity across the organisation. Following the birth of her first child in 2014, she returned to work after 5 months, working 4 days a week. However, the late night board meetings, early conference calls and travel took its toll on Jess and her baby. So when she fell pregnant with her second child, she felt compelled to leave the working world. In December 2019, she launched That Works For Me, a flexible working platform that connects businesses in need of non-full-time resource with skilled professionals in need of remote and flexible options. Welcome, Jess. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Really well. Thank you so much for having me.
No, you're welcome. Well, what a relevant topic this is in these times that we're going to be talking about. So, you know, that introduction really kind of resonated with me personally as a mum of three. We were just kind of talking before we came on air about, you know, I took a career break myself after having my third child, but felt a real loss, actually, wanted to come back into the working world. So I'm sure this story and what you're going to share with us is going to resonate with many people. But tell us a little bit more about you personally, Jess, before we kind of get into the detail.
Okay, so you've mentioned that I worked at Direct Line Group. I had a big job there, like many of us do before we decide to have children. And I returned to work, it was after about 5 or 6 months, and I did a 4-day week. And I think I probably lasted about 8 or 9 months, but it was a really emotional time. So I went back too early to start off with, and then I went back on a flexible working arrangement, but at a time when flexible working just didn't really exist at that level of the organisation, which meant that I was out of sync with everybody, with all of my colleagues, and it made it really, really hard. The pressure was just astronomical, trying to kind of fill this new role as a mother, which was, you know, comes with its own emotions, as everybody knows, and to try and continue on in this job that I loved. Actually, I really loved. I'd worked for a long time. I'd worked really hard to get there, and I was devastated when I made the decision to leave. I found it really tough. And like you, so I had a bit of a career break. It was a bit shorter. I think I lasted about 10 months after I had my second baby, and I kept on meeting mums, dads, grandparents, loads of different people, loads of different ages, who it felt like they had been forced out of the working world, really, because they couldn't fit that Monday to Friday 9 to 5 model. And I remember every time someone said something, me just feeling more and more bewildered. And then I got quite cross one day. I was speaking to another friend, and I'd been to see her, had a play date, as you do, and she'd been Chief Marketing Officer for a really well-known company in the UK, one of the FTSE 100 ones. And she was talking about going to work in her local Majestic Wine 2 days a week, just to get out the house. And I say I probably saw red at that point. I just thought, what is going on? How can we live in a world where people are being forced out of the workplace and losing all of these skills and going to do something that, you know, they could probably have done when they were 16, had no experience and no qualifications behind them, that, you know, that we can't do something about that. And I stewed on it for a while, and I've had, I think, what people tend to refer to as a light bulb moment about a couple of months after. I think I was chatting to another friend who runs a really successful business. She'd called me in tears one day because her business was about to go bust. She basically had 2 junior finance persons, probably the best way to put it, and they'd not been reporting her cash flow properly. And she was on the brink of her losing her whole business, her whole livelihood. And I'd said to her at that point, why haven't you got a CFO? You know, you should have somebody here who's telling you the right things, who's got the right level of expertise and helping you out. And she said, I'm not big enough. She's like, I haven't got enough work, I'm not big enough. And I was like, you absolutely are. If you had somebody who'd done this before, who knew exactly what they were talking about, but they only wanted 6 days work a month, or, you know, a couple of days a week or something like that, then it would suit you both perfectly. And at that point, I was just like, I think I might be onto something here. And I couldn't find anything that brought together that experience and that skill set that exists in people who've dropped out of that sort of standard archaic working model, and businesses that need somebody but not in a full-time capacity. And that's what I then designed That Works For Me to do. And yeah, we've been up and running for about 6 months now. And let's just say it's proven that there was a definite gap in the market. We've got a couple of thousand members, increasingly lots of businesses actually, and even through the times that we've just been through, we're definitely still getting lots of people signing up. So it's, yeah, there's just a massive need for it, and I'll come on to talk about that more in a minute.
Yeah, and obviously you and I have spoken about, being a working mum, but presumably, this is a solution for multiple different types of people. It's not just about your working mum. I would imagine this is appealing for lots of different groups.
Absolutely, this is 100% not a mum thing. This is, so in a recent survey it came back that 87% of people want some sort of flexibility in their role. 87%. Now the estimate is around 46% of people have it, but that takes into account sectors like technology, where you've got near on 90% as an offering. So that effectively means that some 40% of people that fall in between that gap are unhappy with the rigidity of their working structure, and to say that we would just sit back and accept that 40% of people are unhappy just doesn't work. Now that's not a mum population, that's anyone. It's dog owners, it's people with grandparents, it's people with disabilities who can't leave their house. It impacts anybody who wants some level of autonomy over their own time.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm excited to hear more about it. So over to you, Jess. Thank you.
Well, we've probably covered my first couple of slides. Natasha, if I can just ask you to skip forward to this one. So what I'm going to cover today, is what is flexible working, what does that look like? And we'll talk about ways of doing that well and not so well. And then I think have a talk about what happens next, because obviously we've just been through some months of absolute turmoil that nobody expected. So it's important to look forward and I think about our duties as people to make sure that we take a big professional step forward here. So I've mentioned some of the statistics. So flexible working comes in many shapes and forms. So we define it, That Works For Me, as any job that isn't Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 on site with an employer. So it has some element of flexibility to it. And you can see here the many examples of different types of flexibility that exist. Shift patterns, a fairly obvious one that's been around for a long time. Remote working is the one now that most people are familiar with, and I will talk about this, but I think remote working is not what we are experiencing at the moment, and that's my biggest fear about how people's perceptions of flexible working have been negatively impacted by what's happened recently. Actually, remote working can be massively useful, again, for people in all circumstances, parents, people with pets, everybody. I don't think there's a single person that having the ability to work remotely at times that it doesn't touch. Compressed hours is an increasingly popular one, actually. So you see lots of people asking to work 35 hours in whatever your allocated number of hours may be, in 3 days or in 4 days. The NHS use this one quite effectively for lots of their shift patterns. So they use 3 12-hour shifts to make up a weekly allowance. And that can work. It's a long time and it's a long period of concentration. But I think depending on the job types, then that one can work quite well. Part-time, very well documented. I think most people and a lot of organisations think of part-time as being somebody who perhaps only works 12 hours a week, but actually this might mean a change from 35 hours down to 32 hours, for example, to allow for, having to travel long distances and things. I think it can mean so much more. I actually detest the term part-time because I think it comes with, for a lot of people, it's attached to a bit of a sense of derision about somebody who doesn't put in the same amount of time and effort, and that's not right and that's not fair. So actually, we tend to talk a lot more about the number of hours that are put in as opposed to whether you're part-time or full-time. I just don't think it's terribly helpful. Core hours. So core hours can work really, really well in lots of office environments. So lots of people will have everybody has to be around between 10 and 12 or 10 and 2. And that works really well for scheduling meetings. There's always going to be people that don't fit in it, but I think having that guide as this is the time that people are available can work really, really quite effectively for having people on different work patterns, but being cohesive and together at a time that they need them. Job shares. Now, job shares are on the up, I would say, at the moment. So there are some great examples. I know there are a few schools actually that have been in the media recently for having head teachers in job share positions. There are a couple of high profile ones across the insurance industry and in other sectors. If you can get a job share right and you become good at it, I think it's an absolutely fantastic way of having twice the amount of skill and twice the amount of experience put into one position. And I would love to see this one used more. There's lots of tools and things out there now to make job shares work effectively. Different work patterns. I've put this one on there because this one's so simple. This can be, I come into work from 9:30 after I do my school drop off, where the person sat next to me prefers to work early mornings and they come in at 7:30 and they leave at 3:30. That ability for an organisation to flex by individual is really, really important to delivering what that person needs. I mentioned about that autonomy over their working life, just to be able to say, actually, yeah, it's not a problem that you come in slightly earlier or leave slightly later. But I think it's one that's often overlooked, but can make a huge difference to individuals' happiness at work. Flexi time, again, this one's used quite a lot. I know that the police use this for all of their back office staff. So this is where you're given an allocation of days that you can build up by working overtime or outside your normal hours. So if you're contracted to work from, as an example, from 9 till 3, but 2 days a week you can work till 5, you can build up those hours and then you can use them at other times that you need to. Flexi time for me is a really interesting one. So from an organisational point of view, the commitment to flexi time is going to very much highlight where you have people working too many hours in a job. So where the job is too big for the number of hours that you fit, or perhaps there's some issue with efficiency in there. But this one definitely highlights any underlying issues where something isn't quite right. And I think organisations are very brave that do it, but I also think it's an incredibly powerful tool for employee wellbeing and keeping your people happy.
Jess, on this, because I think, certainly throughout my career, there's some here that I've seen used more so than others, and I entirely agree about your point on job sharing. Actually, I worked in a previous organisation, and we had a couple of roles actually where the job shares existed. So I've seen them work particularly well, but I'm interested in your views on the ones that are maybe more in demand, either from an individual's perspective or from a business point of view.
Yeah, so I mentioned job shares definitely being increasing. I think people are a bit scared about job shares. They don't really know how they work. They don't need to know about finding a partner. Is it the organisation's responsibility? Is it the individual's responsibility? Like I mentioned, if you are willing to take a bet on this one, then it can be a real advantage to you, because you get two people. So two people is always going to be better than one. And deciding kind of how you split that and how you split responsibilities is really interesting and really important to making that work. There are lots of organisations out there now actually that specialise in job shares and helping you find people and match people to work together in that position. I'd happily send those on afterwards if that's useful. Yeah, in terms of what people are looking for, I think that at a most base level, it's probably that difference in work patterns that I mentioned. So how can I do the same thing that I need to do, but do it slightly different so it suits my life? And then I think organisations that make it work quite well and it's the norm for them, I think probably a combination of compressed hours combined with remote working, I think, are probably the two most popular ones that again, because they give people that feeling of autonomy over their lives.
Yeah, and to what degree do you get the sense that COVID-19 has impacted those demands and potentially even those statistics?
I believe that I think the impact, and I will talk about it a bit more later, but I think there are two significant things that will come out of this. So number one is lots of people have had a taste of remote working that hadn't had it before. Now that taste for them is either going to be a good taste or a bad taste. Yeah. My big fear with all of this is that people believe that what's happening now is remote working. Just to be clear, it's definitely not. What's happening now is that we've been forced to work from home under clouds of stress, illness, emotional difficulties, not being able to see people. That's not remote working. Remote working is where you get to choose that you work away from the office on your terms in an environment that you choose. And I worry that about the negative impact that this situation that we're in at the moment has on flexible working longer term. And if you take one message away from what I talk about today, it is that you hear what I've just said, that this isn't flexible working in practice. But we've all got a duty, I think, to look back and think about what's worked, what hasn't, what's the good practice that we can take forward, where have we been able to jump forward. But then we also acknowledge that things like communication problems and people not being included where they should have, lots of those niggles that will have affected people day to day are symbolic of the fact that we were forced to do this at a very quick pace, as opposed to doing it in a thought out and organised way.
There's a lot of learnings, isn't there? A lot of learnings for businesses and for leaders and for people seeking opportunities as well at this time.
Absolutely, and I think so many people will have learned so much about themselves. So the amount of people who have decided that actually they really don't like working at home very much. I know lots of people. My business partner, she did exactly that. She took a few months off to test before we went live, and she absolutely hated it. Was desperate to get back into the office. I'm the complete opposite. I've got 3 young children. It really suits me to work from home. But that said, I love a day out every couple of weeks or so to go and meet people and talk to people. So we're all different.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So if we can click on to, I'm going to talk now about how we can do this well and how not to do it well. So I always talk about 3 headings in this. Sorry, Natasha, if you can just drop onto the next one for me. I talk about 3 headings here, so culture, infrastructure, communication, and I don't think those won't come as a surprise to anybody who's tried to implement any sort of organisational change before. I'll also try and talk very much about tangibles as opposed to talking kind of philosophically at a level about how this all works, because I think it's much more useful to come to something like this and think about how it works in practice. So under the culture heading, the big thing for making flexible working work is about all being in this together. I think the way that it works in lots of organisations is that you have these small pockets of people that do flexible working, they do it well, and there can be a bank of desks behind you and they won't offer any flexible working at all. And actually that can sometimes cause more harm than good, because it causes some ill feeling, some friction, and it pushes apart. The reason that happens is because lots of it is left down to the line manager to decide, which is great. A line manager should absolutely, decide how they run their team. But when flexible working works best is when there's commitment from every level of the organisation. So your board, HR, and your management team are all committed to making it work. That then needs buy-in from the team. So wherever you work, there are often people who, I'm trying to put this in a very inoffensive way, if you've gone through your whole career and you have maybe had a wife at home who's brought up your children and you've never had any element of flexibility, to then see this work in practice and see people be able to sort of come and go as they please can feel quite alien to you. So one of the things that I recommend the most to making this work effectively in an organisation is to sit down within those teams and give everyone the opportunity to air their concerns, their opinions, their views, work through those, highlighting all of the benefits of flexible working, which are tenfold. We'll come back to that in a minute. But really give everyone the opportunity to air any harboured resentment that they've experienced in the past, where some people have been able to do things and others haven't, and commit to some sort of charter about how it's going to work. So you give everybody the opportunity to talk through what their needs are, what they would benefit from. Is it time? Are they trying to reduce their commute? You really get under the skin of what people need, and then join that together with some sort of team charter. So everybody agrees that this is the way that we're going to work as a team going forward. You then, I've put on there bravery, because there is always going to be a time where you're the person that has to say, I can't make that meeting, I can't do that, I'm going to have to put my hand up and be the difficult person because it doesn't fit with my flexible working arrangement. There's an element of bravery at the beginning where that happens, and then I think there is that when you introduce flexibility, it needs to be flexibility from both sides. So this isn't right, we're agreeing this and it's absolutely rigid. When we talk about these things up front, you talk about when the team are going to get together. For example, if somebody's working Monday, Wednesday, Friday, somebody else is working Tuesday and Thursday, there's never going to be a day that they're in together. So actually you need some sort of flexibility from both parties in order to make that work for your team. Leadership, I've put in here, is absolutely critical to this. Now, I've often found that when you introduce something new to a team, we quite often say, this is how we're going to work now, this is what we're going to do, off you go and implement it. And when managers are left to deal with something that they haven't experienced before, particularly remote management, which is what you're then asking them to do, their reaction to that will be a very overzealous helicopter checking in style. And I've heard a lot of that in the last few months, people being asked to work with their camera on all of the time, so that people can see what they're doing when they're at the desk, and people checking logs and that type of thing. One of the things that's most important to this is making sure that you retrain your people on how to manage remotely and some of the best practice behind that.
Jess, just on that, because I think it's a really pertinent point, and one that certainly within Irwin Mitchell we've done a lot of work to support our leadership population, so that actually you create this environment of trust and openness and honesty. In your experience, maybe you've touched on some of this already, but what do you think are the biggest blockers? What do you think is a fear that leaders may have with this perceived new way of working?
It's presenteeism in its most crude form, I think. So if I can see you sat in front of me, then I know you're working, and that never accounts for what they're actually doing. So if somebody's computer screen, if they're sat opposite me but their computer screen is facing the other way, I don't actually know what they're doing the whole time. But that not being able to see them at all, well, then I've got absolutely no idea what they're doing. And I think that's the biggest blocker. People find that really, I feel like lots of managers feel that their control over their team and the performance of their team is down to is down to seeing them and seeing what they're doing. It requires a real transition towards really good objectives and really smart goals, and the ability to let go on how those are achieved. Yeah. So being able to be, really take a step back from it and say, right, these are the things that I need from you in order to do your job effectively, but I'm going to step back and let you figure out that how. And I think that psychological jump for a lot of managers is a really tough thing to try and overcome.
And it's that, I'm just going to say, it's that distinction between leadership and management, isn't it? Not just management of a process or a workflow. It's more around, actually, like you say, that team charter, the cultural piece around how do we do things around here, even though here is remotely at the moment. And I just want to share a comment that's come in just as you were talking then. Someone said, I think the current home working has actually opened many companies and leaders' eyes to the fact that home working can work. My experience has been very positive, change preconceived ideas. So, that's great to hear. I think it probably resonates with many people on the call and beyond, I'm sure.
Absolutely, and I think when it's done well, it was a story that went massive at the time. The Pepsi CEO, I can never pronounce his name, Robert somebody, but he talked about leaving loudly, which I absolutely love. So his steer to all managers in his company was, if you're leaving before everybody else, or you're leaving before the 5 p.m. finish time that everybody knows so well, do it loudly. Tell them where you're going and why, because I used to do it. I know when I had, even though it was my team that I was running, I would wait until everybody went into the office and then I'd run out quick, or someone had gone to the toilet and then I'd run out quickly, so that I didn't have to stand up and say, oh, I've got to go and get my train to pick up my baby. And people don't like to stick out like a sore thumb. So those leaders demonstrating that and making a really big deal about it, particularly in the early months of implementing effective flexible working policy, is so important. It really is. And leadership's absolutely massive. I remember we rolled out a dress down Friday. Lots of companies do it now, but it was kind of fairly new part of the culture. And I went to a board meeting on the Friday just with a casual jumper. It probably had some like little rips in it or something. Probably a bit too fashionable. But I walked into the room and they were all wearing shirts and trousers. They just didn't have their ties on. That was dressed down. As I left the meeting, someone pulled me aside and said, Jess, this really isn't appropriate attire to come and speak to the board in. And I was like, oh, it's dressed down Friday. But to me, that's a real example of setting something and then just not living by it. Like, you can't say it's okay and tell someone off for it.
You've got to role model, haven't you? Yeah, as part of being a leader, being role modelling, sure.
Absolutely, that role modelling is massive. And it all comes down to communication, doesn't it? So I think particularly when you're talking about implementing flexible working, that collaboration, we've talked about it between team members, but also between your team and other teams. So if there are another team that you work really closely with, how are you going to maintain that communication with them? If you're not all in the office at the same time, what's that going to look like? How are you going to make sure, where you used to sort of spin around on your chair and have a chat with somebody, how do you make sure that you're still collaborating to talk to things and produce the absolute best results? I think something like this really has the power to bring a team together using a sort of a charter type approach like I've talked about, but it absolutely needs that openness. It needs for everybody to feel included, and it needs to be a real kind of team effort to make that happen. Tools are massively important, I think, when it comes to communication. So I think if you'd said 6 months ago, if you'd talked particularly to large organisation about tools like Slack and WhatsApp and that type of thing, they might have looked at you with a bit of a funny look on your face. But more than ever, having those tools available to you to facilitate this method of working is absolutely imperative. As are the other elements of infrastructure. So I know, Amy, we talked a bit before about your internal technology and how that's best used. Lots of law firms that I talk to are still very much paper-based, so the concept of remote working for them has been a huge struggle. But actually, if you can bring your technology up to the point where you're able to work effectively in that way, it's then just getting back to that culture battle about how you change change your internal processes to support that new infrastructure.
And actually, the two require each other to work best. So you need the culture to make best use of the tech, and vice versa. So I think they're really strongly, particularly in these times, intrinsically linked, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, massively. It is with most things. I think half the battle when you roll out anything new is getting people to use it and use it in the right way. But I think I always hark back to that stat that I think 86% of tech firms work flexibly, and for that they tend to work at the most extreme methods of flexible working as well. There's no reason actually why a tech firm should be any more flexible than a law firm or a finance firm. What they're doing is fundamentally still talking to people, and it's still computer-based activity. It's just that they are. That's what they did from day one. You know, they're much newer companies. That's how they set about. But it's also it's no mistake that those companies are the ones that have the highest employee wellbeing scores and the highest happiness, because it goes back to that autonomy over people's lives, them feeling like they've got a bit of control and that they're able to prioritise the things that are important to them. I've mentioned on infrastructure workspace as well, because I think this raises some quite interesting conversations around workspace, and whether the current setup, I don't know what yours looks like, but I think a lot of the setup is still rows of desks and that type of thing. And some people have moved to hot desking, which I suspect there'll probably be a bit of a pullback from now, bearing in mind current situation. But actually, if lots of people are working from home and working in different spaces, do we want to come in and sit at a desk? Or actually, do we all want to sit around a table so that we're talking to our colleagues and using that time effectively when we are face to face to get to know each other and work on sort of problems and things together? And I think it will be really interesting to see how that plays out. I was speaking to a facilities manager up in London the other day, and she was talking about all of the different changes that they've made and moving much more towards pods and big circular tables and things, very much away from that sort of traditional desk-based and office-based environment.
It's fascinating. I think, and I actually really like the term workspace, because it's kind of all-encompassing. But don't you, that when you have a stand-up discussion, or you have a session where you're just thinking innovatively or creatively, sat on sofas with usually bags of sweets and coffees around, that the outputs are very, very different depending on that space within which you're working. So I think there's a real opportunity for businesses to use workspace differently.
I couldn't agree more, and it always makes me laugh so we used to have lots of team offsites, and we'd always go somewhere that was really relaxed and had beanbags in the room, and exactly like you say, we'd have sweets and things, and you'd be so productive, and everyone would get to know each other, and we'd laugh and joke, and then we'd go back to our desk the next day, and everybody kind of sat staring. It's the results that come from that, and the cultural piece again, that camaraderie between people working together and teams, and all of it is just all interlinked to generating success. Any other questions on the sort of implementation or how to do it well?
No, I think we've covered them as we've been moving through. Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, so obviously everybody has been through a incredibly difficult time in the past few months, and I couldn't even begin to comment on how it's felt personally for people. But from a work point of view, I think one of the contributors to that has been this forced remote working that we've said about. And it's great to hear that some people have really enjoyed it and some people have liked it. I think I was listening to the radio a couple of days ago, and there was a phone in around how people felt about remote working. Lots of people were phoning in saying they hated it, and I think that's kind of where we are now. I mentioned before about this perception of, I've been working flexibly for the last few months and I really haven't liked it. Just to be clear, you haven't been working flexibly. You have had a situation thrust upon you that has had lots of other components at play that wouldn't necessarily have been there had this been a very well planned out transition to flexible working options. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
That said, there is a silver lining from a work perspective that comes from all of this, in that lots of organisations have been forced into a position where they have had to facilitate remote working and different styles of working just to keep afloat. And I think the position we now find ourselves in is one of we've learned a lot and we've done a lot over the last few months. So what do we do with that now? And I think what happens next would be really interesting. Natasha, if you could just skip on 2 slides for me. Sorry, I'm dotting around. Thank you. I think that what will happen in the short term is, we're seeing it already, unfortunately. There's going to be very much a short-term focus on cost. And one of the easy savings that I think lots of businesses will see is that they have very big, expensive offices in expensive locations. And I think short term there will be a focus on that and how they make savings. Lots of CFOs will be asking questions about resources and that type of thing. However, once we overcome this, and I genuinely believe we will, I think there'll be perhaps a few months of turmoil, but we will come out of the other side when that focus will very much be back to how we work, not on whether we're working. But we'll then revisit the benefits of flexible working, which are the ones that I've got here listed on the page. So of course we talk about cost, but actually the reason that flexible working delivers so many of these benefits is because people have control. So if you're able to deliver this effectively, that improvement to your employer brand and what you can offer people is really significant. And I mentioned before about the tech firms, but there's a reason for it. People are more motivated and they're more productive. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but there are countless studies out there that demonstrate that lots of people work 20% more effectively doing 20% less time. And that relationship is
well, you only have to think about the times when you know that you're going on a holiday. It's always a great example, isn't it, where you know that you're going to be out of the office for 2 weeks. So actually you have that period the week before where you become super productive because you've got that, you know that you're not going to be in the office for 2 weeks of a month. So I can absolutely understand that you've just mentioned there.
And it's human nature. If we're given a deadline, we've got something to work to.
Yeah.
Everybody's the same. There's very few people in the world that you meet who complete things now just because they need to be done now. And the positive impacts are there in black and white. Not just here. There are so many studies. I think the employers that are able to get this right will see those. I believe flexible working is an answer to so many of the issues that we've got at the minute. So the same organisations that are not willing to be brave and implement flexible working are the same ones that are complaining about lack of diversity on their boards, about big gender and race pay gaps. They're society-wise, there are so many issues. I think loneliness in the elderly. I think so many children at teacups and breakfast clubs when parents don't necessarily want to put them in. There are lots of different, I'm not saying this is a silver bullet for all of them, but I'm saying it's a massive step towards overcoming lots of those. And for organisations, that increased motivation, that increased productivity, those happier employees, I don't think any business will turn around and say, I don't want my people to be happier, because they know the benefits are there just from all of the metrics and KPIs that we look at around turnover, sickness and that type of thing. It also, the real tell for me will be the organisations that do this very well, who are willing to recruit differently as a result. So would you be willing to recruit somebody who you potentially won't meet for 3 months because they live on, I don't know, the other side of Ireland, depending on where you are? It's being brave enough to trust yourself and to trust the people that work for you. That's the point at which you have to begin. And I should have labelled on it more earlier, but you mentioned it. Trust is absolutely instrumental to making this work, and you have to start in a position of trust. It's not a case of earning it. Somebody asked me recently about whether it would be a red flag if an organisation said, sure, you can have some flexible working, but not until you've been here for 3 months. To me, that says that's saying, come in, earn your stripes, and then I'll let you go again. And that doesn't, to me, symbolise an organisation that are doing this well from the beginning, because they're forcing that to be earned.
And the reality is, I guess, Jess, you know, with many things, as we're all transforming our organisations, and we're trying to move quickly given the current circumstances, we may not get everything right first time, and that's okay.
Absolutely, and that's the same with anything. But I think it's moving culture to a much more grown-up place where people can have conversations about things and improve things. And again, goes back to that cultural place of are you in a space where you can have a conversation where people feel like they can be open and they can actually express opinion. Of course mistakes will be made, but they can be overcome as well. That's the important thing to keep in mind.
One question that I've got on this around the impact. So one of the things that many businesses are looking at, I'm sure, is their level of agility to varying degrees. How, in your views, Jess, does taking this flexible option support that aspiration that many businesses may be working to at the moment?
I think I mentioned to you earlier, I think the organisations that do this well will find themselves in a better place. If you imagine that if you have a shift that you need to cover, so say you've got between 8 and 8, and you've always been very regimented about having some people work from, I don't know, 8 till 4 and some other people work from 12 till 8. Actually, if you're able to break that down and split that into different groups and some smaller shifts, ultimately you've got more people with more skills and undoubtedly more diversity. It's just being able to see that. And I think lots of people will then say to me, oh, all of that comes with a cost. It does, but it's quite a short-term cost. And if you can bring yourself to focus on the longer-term benefits of it, then it's absolutely offset. I would say more than neutral. It becomes much more significant. That dual skilling, that ability to be more responsive, that having just more tools and more people and more skills at your fingertips.
Great.
The only other thing really that I was gonna close on was talking about this gift that we've been given. Really, I think this is probably the closest thing to a work revolution that we'll see in our lives. And whilst there are undoubtedly some negatives that will emerge and some mistakes that have been made, as we talked about, we will never be in a place where a different way of working has been trialled on this scale in this short space of time.
Yeah.
And I guess I urge everybody to just pause for a moment and take all of the positives without attributing anything bad to, straight away, without reflecting on it, because we've taken a big jump forward, and it would be really devastating to see everybody fall back there just because of anecdotes or lack of information. This will make such a big difference to people's lives. Go back, have the conversations, talk to people, find out what worked, find out what didn't, find out why, find out what tools there are out there to fix some of the problems. Because when you do something like this on such a mass scale, you have to be able to reflect back on it and learn and make improvements as you go along. And I think the onus is on all of us as people who want to take a bit of control back over our lives and our working lives to really make that happen, and force our employers to make that happen as well.
Absolutely. And I guess, what works for people and businesses today is going to evolve and change and be flexible within itself, isn't it? So it's that constant evolution that, will bring challenges, but heaps of opportunities too.
Absolutely.
Great. Excellent. Well, I mean, fascinating conversation. I think we could fill another hour, Jess, to be honest with you. So thank you for your insights. Thank you for answering the questions, and a really fascinating conversation that I'm sure all of the audience will have found particularly interesting. So before we close down, I just want to remind everybody about the hub that we've got. So we have these Thursday Thought events every single week. We're really, really keen to hear about topics that would be relevant to you. So please do get in touch with us at the website. We will share a recording of this session straight after this one ends. And thank you for taking the time to join us. Enjoy the rest of your day.